Hey there, welcome back to Limabean Living. In today's video, I am sharing how I make homemade, ready-to-bake from frozen pizzas. So for today's video, I will be milling my own flour. This is something I'm trying to incorporate more in my baking because of the health benefits. There's more fiber and it's just a lot more nutritious than the store-bought flour that I was used to getting. And I have noticed that when using it with other ingredients like these pizzas or in cinnamon rolls or wherever you're adding in other flavors, it typically masks the kind of nuttiness that comes from using wheat berries, and you really can't tell any difference in the flavor. So for this recipe, I like to use 1 1/3 cups of warm water, and I add typically a little bit more water when using the freshly milled flour because it does absorb a little bit more than the store-bought flour. So if you are using store-bought flour, I typically use about 305 grams of water, and if you are using freshly milled flour, I typically use about 380 grams of water. And you want this water to be about 95 degrees. So I typically microwave it for around 30 seconds. In addition to the water, you will need 1 teaspoon of sugar, 2 tablespoons or about 27 grams of oil, around 4 cups of flour, which I have calculated to be about 581 grams. So if you are using store-bought flour, you can have this many grams of that flour, or if you are milling your own, just weigh out this much and you can mill it and it's gonna work the same. You will also need 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, 2 teaspoons of salt, as well as 2 teaspoons of garlic powder. So typically I actually use my bread machine to do all of the work for me, but I recognize that not everyone has a bread machine, so I will be making this using my stand mixer, just so that you have a better idea of how you might be able to do this at home. So the first thing you're going to want to do is, after you have warmed up your water, add the sugar as well as your yeast to the water and give it a good mix and let it sit out for about 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, the yeast should activate and bloom, and you are ready to pour this into your mixing bowl. Or you could take the smarter route and pour it in your mixing bowl from the start so that you don't have to dirty up, extra stuff. Then we're going to add in our flour, our oil, our salt, and our garlic powder. We're going to let the machine knead the dough for a handful of minutes until the dough is pulling away from the sides of the bowl. When I use my bread machine, it typically kneads it for about 20 minutes, but I think it kneads it longer than you would have to in a stand mixer because we've already bloomed our yeast. In a bread machine, you just pour the yeast in on top and then you kind of let it do its thing, so you don't get that activity from the yeast initially. Once the dough is all kneaded, you can go ahead and remove it from the bowl. I like to grease mine with some avocado oil, and then I form my dough into a nice little ball before plopping it back inside my bowl. My bowl has a lid, but if you don't have a lid for yours, you can go ahead and cover it with a damp towel, and then you want to put it in a warm place to rise. My oven actually has a proofing setting so that it creates a nice warm environment for the dough to rise, and so I typically use this because it kind of speeds up the process. When I'm using my bread machine, I have found that it takes about an hour and 10 minutes to proof in the machine, and so I typically like to check on my dough ball after that amount of time when it's in the oven under the proof setting. So now that our dough has proofed and doubled in size, we are going to take it out of the oven and then preheat our oven to around 415 degrees. You could probably do 425 as well. We like a nice warm temperature when we're working with pizza. So this recipe does make about 2 large rectangular pizzas. I make them on my little cookie sheets. I don't need my pizzas to be round. They will be consumed either way. And so I divide my dough in half, and then I try to spread it out evenly in a rectangular shape, filling the pan. I typically try to mold the pizza with my hands first, and then I use a rolling pin to make it nice and flat. And I have learned over making this a few times that I want my dough to be actually pretty thin, probably around 1/4 inch in thickness, because when it's baking in the oven, it will puff up a bit. And so if you start with an already thick piece of pizza dough, you're gonna have a very crusty, doughy pizza. And if that's what you like, go ahead and do that. But I have just found that kind of the thinner the better for me. Now that the dough has been, rolled out as best as I could to make a rectangular shape, I go ahead with a fork and poke it a bunch of times. And I don't know if this really is very helpful, but I kind of just, in my head, it makes sense to do this because when you're baking, if there's little holes, it'll fill in the holes and maybe not rise as much. Plus, I think I've seen pizza places kind of create little holes in their dough before they get baked, so I just kind of feel like this is a necessary step, but I have done it in the past without poking holes and it turned out fine too. So as you can see, we have our nice thin dough all poked and ready for the oven, and we are going to bake it in this very hot oven for about 7 minutes. This is called par baking because we're not like fully baking it to its crispy doneness as you would a regular pizza, because when we bake it later after it's been frozen, it will finish the bake and everything will be perfect. So you can see our dough has puffed up a bit, and once it is fully cooled, it is ready to assemble. So the first thing I'm doing is just laying out some plastic wrap that the bottom of the pizza will sit on, and then I'm putting it back on my tray just to make the transfer to the freezer a little bit easier. So this is the cheese and the tomato sauce I like to use from Walmart. I think I looked up the types of cheeses used in Costco pizza, and it was like provolone, mozzarella, and then maybe some Parmesan, which you can always add on at the end. So I like to get this little provolone and mozzarella blend cheese from Walmart. Then we're just going to spread out our sauce, not too thick, unless that's what you like, of course. Really make it however you want and whatever will satisfy your taste buds later on. But I have found that a nice thin layer of sauce works out really well. Then top it with your cheese and any other flavors that you may like. Sometimes I add pineapple. I am a pineapple on pizza type of girl. But if you have little sausages or even leftover sausage from breakfast or something like that, you could throw that on top, or pepperonis. Really make it your own. But now that our cheese layer is done and I'm not adding any other toppings, I'm just going to pop this in the freezer, and I'm not wrapping anything on top. I'm not finishing covering with plastic wrap because I don't want the sauce or cheese to get stuck to the plastic wrap. So we're just going to freeze this for at least an hour. We want everything to be nice and, cold and hard before we give it a final wrap in plastic wrap. So as I'm assembling my second pizza, you can obviously tell that I am pregnant in this video. I was preparing these pizzas for my postpartum period just to make life a whole lot easier. If we forget to defrost some of my casseroles that I prepared, this is something that we can just be like, okay, well, let's just preheat the oven and pop in a frozen pizza and we'll be ready to eat in like 15 to 20 minutes. But as I'm recording this voiceover, I have since given birth, and I look forward to sharing my pretty traumatic birth story. The birth actually was kind of fine. It's the recovery afterwards. So if you are interested in hearing how everything went in, my delivery and all of that stuff, make sure you stick around and subscribe and stay tuned for that video. But another thing I think is worth pointing out is when I have made this in the past, sometimes I like to make little breadsticks or little breadstick bites and cook those in a 425 degree oven for, I want to say 7 to 13 minutes. I forget exactly how long. Pretty much just until the bottoms have a nice golden brown on them. And then I take them out and I melt butter, garlic powder, as well as some oregano and Parmesan cheese. And I mix that up, and then I toss these breadstick bites in this buttery mixture, and they are just so delicious. So for dinner, we might have just one pizza, and then with the rest of the dough, I make these breadstick, garlic, Parmesan bites. It's such a good combo. Obviously, having some veggies and more protein or whatever, it would be good as well to add to that, but it's, carb rich, but with the freshly milled flour, I don't feel as guilty anymore. All right, so it's been at least an hour in the freezer, and our pizzas are ready to be wrapped up in plastic wrap. So I just made sure there weren't any openings, and then I stuck both of these in our packed freezer, ready for my postpartum period. If you guys are curious to see the other things that I prepared to make postpartum life easier, you can go ahead and check out one of my most recent videos where I share all of the different recipes that I've made. So here we are a few weeks later. I've since had my baby, and we needed a pretty easy dinner. So we're popping this frozen pizza straight from the freezer right into a preheated oven that is again, 415 to 425 degrees. And we're gonna let this bake for anywhere from like 15 to 20 minutes. It really just kind of depends on how you like your cheese to look. I will put the exact time that mine was in the oven on the screen, and then it is ready to be devoured. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. And if you are new to my channel, I would really love it if you stick around and subscribe and check out all of my motherhood content, and I'll catch you in the next one. You've made it to the end of the video. If you didn't know already, every Monday and Friday, you can find motherhood and lifestyle content on this channel. And since us moms have to do it all, that may mean yummy recipes, easy DIYs, mom hacks, cleaning and organization, or just a combo of everything. Please know that you are loved and you are made for greatness, and I will catch you in the next one.